Despite it sounding as if there's an angry gerbil in my throat with zero moral authority, after releasing 5 hours of content discussing why Goblin Slayer and 𝓟𝓻𝓷 were train wrecks narratively, at this point, I'm just trying not to laugh because I can't string together the perfect combination of words to describe the loathsome atrocity this mother of all shitstorms on fire with sharks inside the tornado that redo of a healer is, as it endorses revenge through rape and grotesque violence being fantasy revenge porn at every degree, as the main character dicks down his enemies harder than a cuck's wife or an orphan trying to develop an incest fetish. To elaborate more, the protagonist of Redo of a Healer is beyond mentally unstable, and the kind of incel who would pay hundreds of dollars for feet pics of women if he was a real person, or would be called Captain Rapey McRapemeister, the god of overconfidence and utter ex machina-esque convenience, ultimately being walking heroin to Pound Town for all women and a bastard manslayer to all those who are evil, because of course they are. Because in this series, the concept of the proverbial lesser evil doesn't exist. You're either a complete cartoonishly villainous and sadistic evil asshole, or a more tolerable evil asshole than the last. But considering how despicable and morally bankrupt these characters are within their justifications and means, don't justify or give grounds to whatever their ends might be. Neither evaluates the pretentious nature of the protagonist in his brain-dead moral compass, or again, the cartoonishly evil depravity of those that surround him, to where the sinful pleasures these characters delight in are no different from and as easy as breathing. To put it into perspective, every character in this story is infamous for some kind of crime against humanity, or just being an hyper-edgy, over-the-top, massive bottomless trash bag, a sickening evil that even if Jesus died for all their sins, it still wouldn't be enough. While 𝓚𝓷, the protagonist, is, well, I guess he could be called a sexy utilitarian, because after 2 pumps, he can turn a woman's pussy into a rice patty. To not get too specific in the overarching narrative as of yet, the setup for Redo of a Healer is that in a previous timeline that no longer exists because of time travel shenanigans, and should have by all accounts erased his memories but doesn't because of the power of convenience and isekai power fantasy, remembers that in a prior timeline, the people in his adventurers party were all sadistically evil candy ass faggots that drugged him, raped him repeatedly, and tortured him for 4 years for no other reason besides the fact that he was the healer hero, therefore he's useless. Translation, they did it because they could. So, in this new timeline, armed with the scantily littered, undeveloped knowledge of the prior, more on this later, he decides to subject anyone who has ever wronged him to his own sole prejudice and judgment, which at the sum of its parts and at its base level is just more torture and rape than they can endure, with the latter being psychologically breaking their minds, allowing insanity to become their emergency exit from the world. From the moment the narrative begins and 𝓚𝓷 begins building his harem of sex slaves, more on that later, he accumulates an endlessly moving list of people he needs to get revenge on, but his ultimate endgame seems to sum up to nothing, with zero likability and relatability unless you're a sadist or a masochist with depraved delusional wish fulfillment sex fantasies. And oh boy, does the author of this book love writing about unobtainable X-rated red room sex he can't possibly have or watch, because if he did, he'd go to jail. Whereas the relationship dynamic the protagonist has with his harem of sex slaves are built upon a twisted romance of abuse and trauma, mistaking control as a form of affection and love, while his lust for revenge is as perverse and mutated as his obsession and toxic masculinity, bolstered by an artificially constructed sense of indomitable self-righteousness. Translation, he has a god complex. In layman's terms, this is a story where the abused becomes the abuser. Now, to break that down into simpler terms for those that don't understand for some reason, metaphorically, the main narrative of Redo of a Healer is about a little boy who gets sexually molested by a relative for years, understanding and knowing what happened was wrong, to do exactly that to their own children as if it was some kind of sick ritual that needed to be performed, to then turn around and say, what he was doing couldn't be helped because I used to be a victim. The main character of this book became what he hated because according to his logic and rationale, it couldn't be helped. He just had to get his revenge, because of course he does. Now, the general rule of thumb extending from literature to real life is that heroes, or those that publicly serve, treat those who are evil or villains better than the way they treated their victims, because heroes don't sink to villains' level. And as quixotic as that might sound, how are we supposed to strive and construct a better society if someone believes that revenge is a good thing as long as their revenge is reasonable and a demented realization of magic realism? Rooting for the main character of this book is like hoping Ramsay and the Boltons win the Game of Thrones, hoping that Nobuki can rape Asuna from Sword Art Online along with every other rapey villain, and that Sho Tucker from Full Metal Alchemist gets to get away with torturing and experimenting on his daughter because science, and he needs to keep his political status as a state alchemist because of course he does, and nobody should bat an eye or look his way due to the very fact that his daughter is his property. There are so many well-written and better books that write about characters enacting their demented revenge fantasies on whoever did what to them than Redo of a Healer, which is otherwise written by an emo high schooler. For example, Matsumoto Jiro's Frieza is an exploration of such a world where in an alternative Japanese society at war, a law is passed legalizing retaliatory killings, meaning at its base level, if somebody kills your loved one, you are legally sanctioned to kill or hire someone to kill the victimizer. Despite the book's narrowed focus on action and the personal stories following each character as they hire the main character to kill whoever did whatever bad thing to them, there's a subtle social commentary on society and the nature of hatred and revenge. Blade of the Immortal is about a woman who seeks vengeance against the people who slaughtered her family. Ultimately, at the end of the day, Frieza and Blade of the Immortal are both stories about, yes, vengeance, but also an exploration of how these characters cope and hope to find some kind of peace of mind or meaning to life again, instead of fully committing every ounce of their existence to revenge. You could always read Korean Maha, you can always read Killing Stalking, House of Dolls, Blade of the Phantom Master, Innocence, Yubel Blatt, Red Raven, Old Boy, Dear Boy. But the problem with Redo of a Healer is that it's a thin-layered and misbuttoned excuse to have an insanely unstable protagonist that unleashes a plethora of gratification through killings and rapes for the sake of cruelty. In the manga Revenge Classroom, despite how overly convoluted the narrative became, much like Redo of a Healer, it wants to have cake and eat its ice cream too, but didn't find a way to make ice cream cake. Well, let me rephrase that. Revenge Classroom found a way, in where the main character wanted to get revenge on her classmates by ruining their lives by destroying their social status, or by physically harming them through brutal acts of violence and torture, of course. That would only maim them, but it's still pretty bad. Anyway, the author simultaneously wanted the reader to feel empathy for why she was doing all these morally bankrupt things like a sociopath, which ultimately led to the author artificially constructing scenarios where the main character would have an advantage, meaning that despite the story being called Revenge Classroom, she never directly killed anyone, but instead killed people indirectly through other characters exercising free will. Meaning, while the main protagonist, whatever her name was, because I can't remember for a salt and a cracker, did whatever scheme revealing that Jessica was a whore on social media, another secret antagonist would be operating in the background being worse and more eviler than the main character, such as, you know, decapitating another character or putting a bomb in someone's locker at school, because why not? Revenge Classroom is a really stupid book. I'd recommend DeadTube instead. In the case of Redo of a Healer, the author would go out of his way to show these overly dramatized, edgy flashbacks where the main character is tortured and ass raped until his butthole bleeds and is unconscious, just to find out he has a chair shoved up his ass when he wakes up and that his dick's been deflated. But at the same time, remember, this is the main character that is now free to roam the world and travels with bottles of aphrodisiacs just in case he needs to rape someone and erase their memories, or manipulate them in some way, which he does for little to no reason. Then compares raping this random woman to how he frequently rapes both of his sex slaves that he's psychologically conditioned, declaring that she wasn't as good as they always are, followed by a monologue of how helpless the rebel forces are, while visually showing the woman he just raped for little to no reason, considering how vastly overpowered he is as a character and the resources at his disposal, making him an evil Mary Sue. As the saying goes, someone cannot be all powerful and be all good, yet it makes zero sense for this character to completely lack a moral compass despite what his abilities are. The healing hero heals. The book specifically states by manipulating time and matter, Qiray can return things to their original states and heal deep injuries from himself or others. Thus, the The question becomes, why is he so mentally unstable? Logically, the main character uses his innate power for chaos and degeneracy. Instead of healing, completely goes against everything the healing hero exists for. If anything, he should have more empathy and not be a sociopath, but for whatever reason that isn't explained, he's completely insane and morally bankrupt without a reason. The narrative constantly justifies everything he does by saying blah 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 blah. 4 years of torture and sexual assault flattened the camel's back, and loneliness along with my sex slaves are the only friends I need, because why not? And we, the reader, are supposed to care emotionally for his well-being and disregard his actions because he's edgy and that's supposed to be cool. And the only pleasure I took from this book is reading about how stupid the characters are with their laughable motivations and the absurd stupid violence that is so bad. It's just funny to read how seriously the author is taking the events of the story. I mean, again, the main character's relationship with the people of his party are bonds forged by abuse and trauma. There's one side of the coin where he casually refers to his teammates as his toys or playthings, or will just flat out call them slaves, while in his inner thoughts he has no love or seems to be capable of any emotional bandwidth for anyone but himself and his self-centered interests. According to the Wikipedia page, one of 𝓐𝓷𝓲𝓶𝓮's redeeming qualities is that he has no desire to harm those who have done him no harm, and makes a personal rule not to involve innocence into his revenge fantasy, which is completely false. He's harmed hundreds of innocent people and he just doesn't care, which I'll talk about in more detail later, but I'll refer to this again. But to litter around some examples, when Flair, the poster child for the main character's harem of sex slaves, turns out to be an evil sadist in a previous timeline who drugged him and used him as a tool, but is later revealed to be somewhat psychologically traumatized by her older sister Norn, which won't be talked about later because the book doesn't want to say what happened, and uses phrases like that event or that certain time in my life to try to obscure what really happened because the writing is terrible. To reiterate, the main character has the ability to absorb people's memories, meaning he knows everything Flair knows, meaning when he's using words like that to describe something, he's obfuscating whatever he's trying to refer to because the author is trying to cover his ass from something he hasn't came up with yet, because he's writing about 13 other isekais, and that's not a joke. Anyway, 𝓐𝓷 was singularly responsible for the reason why 𝓐𝓷's personality became so fucked and demented. Thus, after acquiring enough strength to take revenge on her, he rapes her with his non-existent magic condom, blasts a couple inside her tum-tum, to then, in his own arrogance, steal her from her emotionally, believing he's justified in his own insane cruelties, and rapes away her identity for cruelty's sake. And this won't be the last time this character does this for little to no reason or his own benefit that's specifically convenient towards the narrative. But after erasing her memories and then completely modifying her appearance and personality, transforming her into an ideal girl, as he calls her, that'll be an obedient dog while leaving her combat prowess knowledge intact, he then turns her into her sex slave warrior companion and convinces her they are lovers, and she obediently follows every command like a cow without any ifs, ands, or buts, because it's all a part of his sex death cult, removing whatever personality she had and replacing it with a cardboard cutout of whatever a possible three-dimensional character looks like. There'll be an entirely separate conversation on this later that'll be more in-depth, but for now, what has been established in this diatribe is that the main character and his supporting characters are either complete garbage in an endlessly filling trash bag, or a cardboard cutout of what used to be a character that now does acrobatics on the main character's dick. However, what I haven't discussed is the nature of the antagonist of this series. Blade Hero, which stole her naming conventions from the Goblin Slayer universe, is literally named Blade Hero. You know, so when she gets tortured and raped, you don't think of her too much as a person, but more as an idea. But the villainy this character indulges in comes in the form of being an insane rapist, of course, who sadistically rapes her victims while torturing them and murders them when it's all over. Blade's cardboard cutout of a character is a psychopathic homosexual misandrist. Misandrist meaning she hates men, and her sexual passion is so demanding she needs to murder to flip her switch on, and throughout the entirety of the book, she cross-dresses as a man to seduce women because of course she's insecure about her sexuality, or just insane. Now, if I put my big boy brain on, this could be a social commentary on toxic feminism, considering when this character doesn't get her way, much like the main character, she's gotta whip out the old 𝓚𝓲𝓚 and roofie drug cocktail party favorite combo, so she can drag her victim into her 50 Shades of Grey mobile torture palace, where she rapes and murders them, because she can. Now, arguably, from my moral standpoint, does this person deserve to die considering she admits on several occasions to have raped women until it finally skull-fucked their brain cells away and died from pain? Yes, she does. But does she deserve to get tortured and raped in the suns by 3 enhanced drugged-out cannibals with the choice of having sex with them till sunrise with their modified libidos, or getting eaten alive after a 2-pump chump and to have her insanity degrade away? No, she doesn't. Does she deserve an injection of drugs or a bullet to the forehead so a bitch like that can go to sleep forever? Sure. But now, after building the foundations of the downright bankrupt rationalization that these characters use to justify why they do what they do, making anyone consider if they're mortally challenged or not, but the real meat and potatoes of why this doesn't even set the precedence of why the narrative couldn't be in any worst possible taste on the pedestal of trash anime, manga, and light novels. It's all bad.
The sauce.
The sauce?
You can't do that! You can't do that! No! You can't do that! Oh my god, what the fuck is wrong with you fucking Eugene faggots, dude? I can't. What the fuck? I didn't know it was that bad! Oh god, this is like a fucking anime, dude!
And it's an anime made by Studio T&K, which is famous for making School Days, the High School DxD series, and most recently the atrocious hentai series, The 7 Mortal Sins, which are comparably tame shows, with the latter being all the self-loathing and death Joy Division used to sing about, making Rising of the Shield Hero and Goblin Slayer look as domesticated as Sailor Moon. But where those 3 series are dedicated to being the spiritual antithesis to more well-known series such as No Game No Life, I Was Reincarnated into a Slime, and my favorite, Log Horizon, in Redo of a Healer, the main character, who has no character at all, considers himself to be a romantic idealist, trapped in a world that can only respond to darkness and cheap violence. However, though the latter series explores similar themes in a shithole nonsensical world, the typical idealist protagonist's support-focused power causes him to be harshly mistreated by his so-called heroes, leading him to develop a bleak outlook and set on a quest for revenge. And though this is a thin-lined excuse the book uses to justify all its characters' crimes against humanity, Rising of a Shield Hero scenario is superficial, with the latter of the story focusing on the friendships Naofumi develops and how they will help him rise above his anger and hatred, becoming a true hero. This doesn't stop the story from being garbage, having characters as complex and thin as a stream of diarrhea. Meanwhile, the level of nihilistic cynicism and dispassionate macabre in Redo of a Healer is like walking through a crime scene, giving us a vengeance-bent protagonist who has thrown away humanity and has a harem-sex death cult whose members have been either raped, then mind-raped, to then be brainwashed, or just so happily aligned with his philosophical ideology of self-obsession and revenge, to where this series is only notable for containing morally dark characters and gratuitous amounts of sex and rape of both physical and psychic varieties, violence, and other horrific acts like genocide, with some characters' kill counts most likely rivaling Joseph Stalin's. Because when the plot isn't circling around a clam slammer spectacular, much like Goblin Slayer, the geopolitical status of the world is swirling in a toilet. But as long as the villains have a good PR team and they believe in their own bullshit, it's alright for everyone else to piss off while this moral incorrectness nonsense continues to drive the story, while none of the NPC characters bat an eye to stop any of it because they're all blind. The Droll Empire, much like the Empire in Akame ga Kill, are corrupt to the core. Its forces constantly oppress demi-humans and are encroaching on demon territory, as well as spouting human supremacy, being xenophobic, using its heroes as a militaristic strike team for conquest more than anything else. And the subverting plot twist in this book is that the demons aren't evil at all. Lame. It's not like I haven't seen High School DxD. And of course, the church is composed of arrogant and depraved assholes that not only embezzle funds, but mark any and all people who don't agree with their fanatical human supremacist agenda in politics as heretics, who the Imperial Knights raised their village to rape, pillage, and burn any competition or conflicting agendas while staffing its ranks with pedophile priests and characters with literally no three-dimensional characteristics, as if the writer doesn't give a single shit regarding the material they're writing, taking zero pride in what's written because what's written should be used as toilet paper. This series is so disgustingly egregious, there is no reason whatsoever to get invested into anything that happens. Any kind of character development, major plot point, minor plot point, doesn't matter, because odds are the problem gets ex machina'd away considering the main character is God, and the residing members of this universe have the attention span of a goldfish, oblivious to the obvious evil characters who are also just too stupid to win. And when they're too stupid to win, they're being massive pussies. Whenever a character gets caught by the main character, they always beg for their lives like they're completely innocent and aren't known for various war crimes, rapes, cruel and unusual torture methods, and ethnic cleansings that would have made Charles Manson and Ted Bundy wet. It's honestly pathetic. None of the villains can own up to their own baggage and die like they have a shred of dignity. It's like all the worst people found each other, and they didn't have more than one brain cell to share. So whenever one of them suffers some ill-begotten fate, it's like a love affair gone wrong with a never-ending waterworks. But the worst the series has to offer is soon to come later, when the main character can't even acknowledge what he is, and when he does, he revels in his acts of evil as if it's the only thing he knows how to be, as if his life is hard, and what he is doesn't ease the pain of his self-awareness to how garbage his character is, ass to ankles. To reiterate, there's a section in this book where the main character is torturing someone, and he accidentally gets a boner. You don't accidentally get a boner from torturing people unless you derive sexual pleasure from it, and it's not the last time it happens. The main character is just a sadist. This book believes that if it calls attention to itself and acknowledges that it's bad, it therefore gives an excuse for its lack of creativity, intelligence, and imagination. But in reality, it's just an admission of the author's lack of effort into crafting a narrative that can please anyone but a sadist, let alone execute and fully realize its themes but scrap the surface level of them. And though the rise of isekai has only been around for about a decade, this has to be the Citizen Kane of it all, making this decade feel longer than a dog's age because its overabundance flaming out heading towards its death throes instead of going out with a blaze of glory. Here's the lowdown on the brain-dead monkeys of the story. The leader is Kiaru, but throughout the duration of this video, his character will be referred to as Eugene, who one way or another somehow have other members of the group magically gravitate towards him through good or ill will. Freya is the first member of Eugene's sex and death cult and is a wielder of incredibly powerful magic, but so naive and clueless because she's been mind raped that Eugene needs to teach her how to use her own spells. Setsuna, whom Eugene bought specifically because he wanted a frontline fighter and, of course, another sex slave. The personality of this character went from she wanted revenge on the people who murdered her tribe and put her in enslavement to her main goal being having Eugene's baby. That's a legit character motivation that's in this book, and everything else that defines her character it's just a cardboard cutout. Eugene could have a rock as a companion, and the usefulness between this character and the rock would be he can't stick his dick inside of it. This book is just so vapid. It's just so bad! Then there's Alibis, aka Eve, who manages to see through Eugene's bullshit, but is too stupid to do anything about it. She wants to become the Demon Lord because the current Demon Lord got critiqued and everyone came to the conclusion that the prior Demon Lord was better. So in response to negative feedback, he decided to ethnically cleanse her race and started a civil war where they're fighting another war with humanity because that's a big boy brain play. So she wants revenge and to be the Demon Lord, but the problem with the latter objective is that she's too retarded to be the Demon Lord. Her character is just so stupid, but considering she doesn't have much of a character to begin with, a bucket of cold piss could be the Demon Lord. Then there's 𝓚𝓕, a pure-hearted soul in a rotten world genuinely fighting to make the Empire a better place, but gets mind raped because the main character is a sick fuck. That's after he actually rapes her, but you must be wondering how this dynamically changes her character. It doesn't. It doesn't. and finally Ellen, formerly known as Norn, who was also mind-draped into being the semi-strategist of the group. Now, because of the continuity of this video, and in accordance with the prior, I read some of the light novel, and I discovered the motivations and why her character is so evil, before, you know, getting her eggs scrambled. However, I'm not able to translate those feelings into words, therefore I'll say the context of the situation and what Eugene learned. So, during a session of sexposition where Eugene forces Freya and her blood-related sister Norn into having sexual relations with one another because he's a sick fuck, it's revealed that these aren't my words, these are the authors. Quote, in Flair's memories, Princess Norn was always harassing her. However, that was no more than reverse goodwill. She wanted her to care for her because she loves her. Princess Norn learned strategy and political strength because that's all she had. Unlike her elder sister, as someone who didn't have anything, she had no choice but to polish something with great effort to enter her sister's field of vision. For Princess Norn, who was a powerless girl without any talent and magic to make that come true, she continued painfully endeavoring because she thought that's all she has. She even begged her father to bring the best teachers there are, and that was possible because of her tenacity. However, in the end, she was hated by Flair. How pitiful! End quote. Now, after saying all that out loud, I've come to the realization that Norn's character sounds like Azula from Avatar: The Last Airbender. It has been a good decade since I've seen that cartoon, but I can tell you, Azula, despite being a psychopath, had better writing and character arcs and character development that Norn doesn't have. So, starting from chapter 1, I'm going to have to make shenanigans to try to make sense out of the geopolitical situation of the world despite reading glimpses of the web novel. In short, the Empire is pioneering the idea of I'm alone and nobody cares about me through brutal oppression mixed with total information control, which is devastatingly effective. Humanity is at war for little to no reason with a demonic species that also happens to be going through a civil war with different political factions trying to grab whatever lick of power they can hold on to because politics that have the gravity of preschoolers playing dodgeball in the playground. But most people in the Empire have little idea just how much better comparably life is outside the Empire. Not everything is trash and not everything is out to get you, but for whatever reason these people are taught from birth to the grade that the outside world is monstrous and hostile. And even when it's obviously biased and distorted, that kind of relentless propaganda has the effect causing people to believe they live in a hopeless world, to the point where most characters can't tell if they stepped in a bullshit or succumb to the uncertainty and fear that the world constantly presents, to where revolution or rebellion isn't even a topic of discussion that can be overridden by the people's survival instinct. Now, in an attempt to not play grab ass of how I'll depict the story of Rita over Healer, to showcase how dime a dozen the narrative really is, and to not come crashing down like a massive hypocrite from a mountain, in the manga, the hero who seeks revenge shall exterminate with darkness, Eugene speaks the exact horseshit this protagonist can understand perfectly. The story revolves around the hero Raoul, who had defeated the Demon King as the strongest hero should have become the savior of the world, until his companions and family are killed by the cartoonishly evil, power-hungry aristocrats brought up upon false charges by the princess. More specifically, the princess is a cunt, and when she's not a cunt, she's a psychopath that'll make anyone seize up in terror. Because the reason why all this death and destruction is happening is because the main character wouldn't have sex with her because the main character loved his wife. But the real horror in all of this is that the being enabling the main character's destructive tendencies is a sadomasochistic goddess with genocidal fantasies completely infatuated with the main character because of course she is. But when that's not happening, of course, there's just a gratuitous amount of gratification killings, torture, and rape. But like Rito of a Healer, the most horrific crime is that its author's writing ability is absolute garbage to the point where if it's not giving blanket exposition, the remainder of the text is just irrelevant to the point where you could look at the pictures and make up your own story. So when I make up shenanigans about the hierarchy of events regarding the piss poor political structure of this world, 9 times out of 10, without a doubt, it's most likely a cesspool of pravi run by a coalition of interests who are oppressive fascists that enforce policies that will cause the entire country to circle the drain in economic recessions, eroding public order, and rapid poverty, with god-tier press teams and secret police that'll make the world seem like the anime fairy tale on paper. In the first couple of pages of Rito of a Healer, it goes from Eden in Paradise to Hellscape's Nightmare, having Eugene go from average apple farmer to slave to vengeful soul to hateful and cunning master manipulator demigod capable of shape-shifting, killing anyone, and converting anyone to his sex cult and death-worshipping battle harem of fanatically devoted followers who are just as powerful as he himself, because of course it does. Now, to be blatantly clear, the main character of this book is so overpowered. He has a one-hit KO kill-all move Ex Machina attack, with the only downside being it's a short-range attack called Corruption Heal, which is a warped version of Heal developed by Eugene that uses healing magic to tear the target apart from the inside instead of killing them instantly. A display of this power is seen when the main character in the prologue is able to destroy the Demon Lord that had previously wiped its entire party with the Corruption Heal attack. Now, the reason why the main character doesn't absolutely demolish everything and everyone is because he's an impractical sadist, because despite having the power to pop any living being like a water balloon, he doesn't, because he believes that instant death of his enemies isn't an option and he wants them to suffer as much as possible. He's personally looking to truly hurt the people he hates, saying that such a quick end would rob him of any satisfaction in taking any revenge. Thus, instant kill is only reserved on random goons or whenever the plot presents an enemy too powerful that the author can't write him away, and uses the Ex Machina to solve the problem. Speaking of the story mechanics, the entire leveling system in the story revolves around magic semen. What the To explore this system more in-depthly would cost me my sanity, because there is no system. There isn't a modicum of effort in this book in developing its characters or its concepts throughout the light novel and the manga. Though information is presented to the reader regarding enemy power levels, nonetheless, it's all inconsequential considering how overpowered Eugene is. If anything, the book only features magic semen to have an excuse why characters are constantly having sex, making all the statistics you see again in the manga and in the book inconsequential and irrelevant, being tacked onto the story for no reason but will later be used as an excuse within the series to explain how the main character can be defeated in a very specific circumstance in a very specific situation. Rational sense and reason be damned, because any fight scene, no matter how overwhelming and or powerful the enemy can be or will become to challenge or inconvenience the main character, will never be powerful enough to really kill him, because plot reasons. More specifically, due to the nature of the villains being trash fires and Eugene appearing to be as the lesser evil, of course he'll always win. Prematurely ascending to victory with Super Saiyan style power-ups and Ex Machina contrivances that are all valueless power levels and stats that translate into nothing, considering he has a big dick power move that can one-hit KO people, and his other Ex Machina ability is so stupidly overpowered, coming at the price of supposedly his lifespan, but it still makes zero sense. How are characters able to survive fatal wounds if their stats are high enough, but still manage to get killed at other times despite how powerful they are? Does this mean a character could have level 99 defense, take someone's arm off, and they'd still live because blood means nothing in this world because your hit points are too high? How does health points even work? The story refuses to explain any of its mechanics, but it says it's in a video game world that has video game-like mechanics, but it's not a video game. So which one is it? It just assumes the reader knows, and despite having all these video game-like systems in the light novel and manga, and most likely anime, it's not even an isekai genre. It's just a fantasy world with video game-like elements, which doesn't really make sense again. This is just like 𝓚𝓻𝓷 and How to Pick Up Girls in a Dungeon. Sword Art Online and 𝓚𝓻𝓷 are able to circumvent all this by explaining that ligaments regenerate upon being cut off, thus they centrically hold no value as long as the player had enough hit points to take the damage. But Redo of a Healer says nothing, having its brain in its pants. Nevermore is this present in the story when the main character is drugged out of his mind and used as a sex toy and mannequin, but when the story isn't thinking with the tip of his dick, its concepts and stories are half-baked, to the point where it would most likely sink the Titanic. So when Eugene uses the Philosopher's Stone to rewind time and it doesn't erase his memories or the previous continuity, because of course it doesn't, with the events happening just as they occurred before with very little forethought on the author's part, considering this character should have Batman levels of prep time to prepare for everything, to methodically plan out his revenge and everything that should happen that could stand in his way, but for some reason he doesn't, leads to a massive plot problem. My confusion of all this stems from an overdose of cringe-endorsed gasoline that's on fire. Tanya Saga of Evil and 𝓚𝓻𝓷 as examples. In Tanya Saga of Evil, Tanya is able to use her historical knowledge of events from the future of an alternate timeline, which is supposedly our world, to effectively win battles in an alternate version of World War I where everyone has magical powers. And even though she doesn't have a complete historical knowledge of these battles from our timeline and a master's degree in history, she's able to use a smidget of her knowledge of our world to be effective in battle and write entirely new policies about how to wage war and strategies to be effective in war changing the course of history. And in Log Horizon, real-life abilities translate into someone's aptitude in game. For example, the main character 𝓟𝓻𝓷 is able to build an entire world economy because he went to university for a degree in engineering and knowledge of his homeworld, prior knowledge he had. Even in ReZero, an anime I don't even like, has a wide array of differing timelines that makes each timeline Subaru goes through a little bit more different than the last, which then leads to somewhat compelling storytelling in the form of, yes, Subaru's character knows what's going to happen, but because time wants to happen, how can he prevent a provincial tragedy or use someone or gain something to his advantage to fix things? I don't even need to talk about Steins Gate, but in Redo of a Healer, despite the main character rewinding time, everything happens how it's previously happened before, but in addition to that, it doesn't seem to be any butterfly effect ramifications to any of his actions causing consequences for anything or anyone. Now, admittedly, I should mention his actions ultimately got his entire family and village tribe massacred, but that was because of his own stupidity, for thinking that there wouldn't be any retaliation for him raping and kidnapping the princess and killing several gaggles of guards. Like, high treason is some kind of light treason. There is no such thing as light treason. What I'm simply asking of this series is that when Eugene does something like a textbook narcissist, that there actually be consequences. For example, when he goes to mind rape some other character, the butterfly effect triggers, and for whatever reason that'll be explained later, a character that was supposed to be somewhere else isn't there, and this causes this entire ripple effect of things just going horribly wrong. The beginning of a cascading effect that leads to, I don't know, an invasion from a neighboring country, a geopolitical nightmare, the death of some decent character, but then again, there are no decent characters in this book, which gives little reason for a character to do something insane for the sake of evil, reminding everyone once more, this book offers very little of any substance of, well, anything. So to get this over with, the SparkNotes version of this entire travesty is this. Eugene gets the Ex Machina site from the Ex Machina fairies that shows him everyone's stats. It's good to mention at this point in the story he also refers to this day as the day before he meets Freya, and this is the only time in the story where he uses knowledge of the prior timeline to his advantage in the current timeline. Following this, he eats poison mushroom to gain toxic immunity ability, but of course the story can't proceed any further. He has to make evil cringy faces to showcase how evil he is. And then he talks to Freya, who secretly hates him because he's the healer hero but pretends to like him anyway because she's a garbage human being. And then we find out the Empire, for the sake of being evil, is evil, being a representation of a coalition of interests that aren't really explaining the story. When I say it's not really explaining the story, it's explaining the light novel in volume 6 that the King Doriel, which is the name of the Empire, is called Doriel, wants to take over the continent and become godlike being using mind control because he has a god complex. He wants to eliminate free will without any interesting philosophy to back up his insane ideology, bolstered by a corrupt system that literally benefits no one, even himself, considering war breaks out in the kingdom and Eugene kills him. So after Eugene gets sexually assaulted by another woman and steals some of her powers because he decides today he's not going to be a simp, he blows out some of his brain cells, healing another character's amputated arm. Exposition is given by a random old wizard where he completely jumps the gun and begins pulling ideas out of his ass about how the main character's powers work and somehow manages to be completely right. He even gets the time travel bit right. So based on this newfound Ex Machina knowledge he pulled out on his ass and has acquired zero factual evidence to back it up with only magic as an explanation, they lock up Eugene where his butt cheeks are constantly clocked by various prisoners in a flashback until he escapes, to where he then defeats the head honcho Night Warrior and shapeshifts his face into Eugene's, which is his own, which will then lead later retaliated with the death of his family and village tribe, and oh yeah, his best friend gets raped. Anyway, while that's happening in the background, Eugene goes up to Freya's room, throws her ass in the bed, and blows her back out, which is a small portion of his revenge fantasy. To later mind rape her memories away and manages to convince her that she's his sex slave just to have sex with her again right after blowing her back out literally 10 minutes ago. And just as a reminder for everyone, the main character is a trash bag. But to continue, when the book isn't shoving fan service in your face, and you gotta remember, this character was raped literally a chapter ago, everyone's just racist. And then we're introducing the sex slave harem character cardboard cutout number 2. Now, something interesting this book does is that for whatever reason that can't be explained, if you don't agree with the main character's ideology and philosophy, you're forced to believe in the main character's ideology by artificial circumstance, meaning the main character forces people to and enables them to be just like him because he believes everyone should be like him. Now, to be honest, I don't remember this cardboard cutout's name, but I wrote it down previously, but I'm too lazy to scroll it to see what it is. But the Demi character's backstory is blah blah blah, I was the strongest in the village and everyone looked up to me. And then the patriarch patriarchy attacked and pumped a bunch of whipped cream into my frosty cake. Now she wants revenge because ethnic cleansing is bad and the government sucks. Oh yeah, slavery. Because of slavery too. And for her to enact her genocidal urges onto the human race, of course she has to suck the main character's dick and have sex with him, because why not? And the main character's magic sperm is all powerful, but unfortunately it's not powerful enough to give whatever this character's name is 3 dimensions of any interest of characteristics besides sex slave. So after a few rounds of spot and tickle, all the characters get a raging boner for mass murder revenge fantasy. To have some more X-rated Red Room semi-consensual sex, followed by LOL this so random shenanigans threesome sex party by the river, with the main character's tribe being massacred in the background. This is followed up by him using sexual stimulation drugs on the only decent character in this entire book, because he's a disgusting rapist, of course. This leads to him ravaging her mind and replacing it with a cardboard cutout personality sex slave persona. Did I forget to mention Eugene's just a piece of shit? And when something bad happens to him, he makes it sound like the entire world just ended. He has the audacity to cry like a little girl over the deaths of a handful of people that he barely cared about. Oh my gosh! I mean, if these were well-developed characters, this would be something else, but these characters are never heard of, talked about, or even mentioned ever again in the book, which in turn leads into his next revenge porn fantasy, where he transforms a man into a foot girl, and him/she, or she/him, is raped to death because glorification, killing, and raping, because of course he can. I mean, this is absolutely disgusting, and the dialogue is more atrocious than the actual act itself. This right here is the pleasure I derive from reading this trash fire of a book. It's so bad, it's just funny. Now, there's this other subplot about how the kingdom told everyone the main character was a demon, and some other kind of bullshit that isn't really that plausible if you think about it, followed by a train of events that line up so perfectly I can't believe it happened, but it did. So, the logic behind this is, somehow the main character, despite being surprised his tribe was murdered, somehow went to this arena beforehand, then set up this magic track where it kills everyone who isn't opposing him, because of course it does, and this is him coming up with the plan on the seat of his pants. But considering all of this happened off panel, I'm calling bullshit. Some people would say this is showcasing the intelligence of this character, but considering everyone else in this world has the intelligence of a kindergartner, he's like a university student beating up a middle schooler. Keeping all of this in mind, he semi-exposes the Empire's corruption to the world using mind-raped sex slave number 1. Everyone believes in something that's overly apparent, and that's the end of the second story arc. Introducing everyone's least favorite character, the psychopathic lesbian rapist, whatever her name is, I think it's Blade or something like that. But considering I already talked about this entire plotline in the prior video, I'm not going to touch on it again. Overall, this book, no matter what format it is presented as absolute garbage. The characters are trash, the dialogue is mold growing around a toilet, the motivations of most characters' actions are thin as a stream of piss. I wouldn't read this book if I was in jail. It's all just one big pile of garbage. There is nothing interesting about this book unless you get off on reading about people suffering. Eve's character almost raised my eyebrow. However, when she slept with the main character despite knowing exactly what he was, I lost interest in the character immediately. But what's strange about the entire affair is that Eugene somehow develops a modicum of respect for women after all the heinous acts and atrocities he's committed. At this point in the book, it's actually discovered that he does have a magic condom, and the main character is a walking abortion clinic. Then he goes on a tangent about how he believes men who busts a nut inside of a woman without some kind of birth control is trash, and despite everything he's done as a human being, somehow he's a gentleman. What the This book constantly tries to reinforce the idea that Eugene was a good character until he got the kindness beat out of him by the people around him. But if you read the light novel, he's just a bottomless trash bag. There are no moral evocations about mass murder that can be justified, but then again, every character in this book's sanity is very questionable at best. But upon retrospection, I'm gonna have to retract my statement about the main character, Eugene, being mentally unstable. He's just evil, and the other characters are brainless and naive naive. The human race is at war with demons for literally no reason. King wants to become king of the continent because why not? Like I said, it doesn't matter what format redo of a healer is in, it's just garbage. At best, it's a good laugh. Another good secondary use for the book would be to wipe your ass with if you ran out of toilet paper. Long are gone the anime that have character-focused plots where people come to understand one another and explore a range of emotion and philosophies in an interesting setting, because that's the kind of storytelling I love. Simple, personal, and direct, which is something that has been sadly lost in modern anime, as writers that shouldn't have recognition somehow make mountains out of molehills. And as much as I appreciate doujinshi and indie writers, unfortunately the author of this book doesn't have the capacity to write a good story. I know this person has written 13 other stories, but after reading this one, I'm not interested in reading anything else this person has ever written ever. It may seem like I'm some sort of Spec Ops gorilla beating down some little kid, but if literature is a form of art, Berserk writer is Mozart's and the writer of this book is that emo kid in the back of the class. No disrespect, but even though someone else might like it, this book doesn't make me feel good. I mean, it makes me laugh, but that's just about it. Because from my perspective, this book is just indefensible. The main character is horribly unlikable and obviously evil, and where the story should be focusing on making this person seem more than what he is, as a cartoonishly evil twirling mustache piece of shit, the story spends more time trying to build a massive world with detailed lore and grand stakes and then put nothing into it. It's not even that interesting, it's just a string of cliches. Chickening out of writing a real story with an actual plot with real characters than despicable cardboard cutout stereotypes, representing negative stereotypes and cliches topped off with bad writing. How did this get an anime?